Welcome everyone to Y Exchange. This is a very exciting talk across art and science, where we bring artists from all kinds of disciplines together to share their work and engage with us as the audience. And you will have a really unique experience where you get to see the work from both of these artists and have a conversation essentially with the artists, ask your questions, and really get to dive into the work. So Y Exchange, for those of you who are new, is a co-presented event. This one particularly is co-presented by Counterpulse, Kinetic Arts, ODC Theater, and the Jurassic Residence Artist Program. It is a recorded public event, always open to the public, free, once a month on the last Wednesday, usually this time, not this, not this month, but most months it's the last Wednesday of the month. I'm Alex. I'll be the chat moderator for this event. So if you have any questions or if you have any technical difficulties or anything like that, feel free to communicate in the chat. I'll also be passing along links and resources that the artists share tonight with us. So just to get us started, this we'll see each artist side by side. It's going to be a little bit different than previous Y exchanges, where we have the presentation Q&A and then presentation Q&A. This time we're going to do 2 quick lightning talks with each artist back to back, and then we'll have a really long Q&A at the end where we encourage you to ask questions, really engage with the work and see if there's any crossover between the works that you see tonight. I think the last thing I want to say is, again, this is recorded. So if for whatever reason that makes you feel uncomfortable, please, you can turn off your camera. And then we'll start with every presentation in speaker view. So if you go to the top right of your Zoom screen, you'll be able to navigate between speaker and gallery. And then once we get to the very end of their presentations, we'll navigate to the gallery so we can all see each other's faces and engage with each other a little bit more intimately. Yeah, so that is it really quick, a bit about Y Exchange. I'll pass along some links about Kinetic Arts and the upcoming events in the chat as well. But I don't want to take up too much time, so I want to give it to the artists, and I want to pass it on to our first artist tonight, or actually our first partner, Tara Fuller, the program director of Jurassi's Residence Artist Program, to introduce our first presenter today, which will be Sebastián Peréz. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. So we are going to be hearing from Sebastián Peréz tonight, and he is joining us from Santiago, Chile. And he is an astrophysicist who is interested in a broad spectrum of astrophysical phenomena, from black hole physics to planet formation. Tonight, I'm thrilled to be reintroduced to Sebastián's work. In 2018, he was in residence at the Jurassic Resident Artist Program, where he worked on a charango concerto with his collaborators, media artist Anna Yermakova and choreographer Daria Lorenvikov. The charango was based on the fundamental laws of nature that are at the core of modern science, and Sebastián served as both the physicist and the charango soloist for the piece. So Sebastián is the director of the Chilean Skies Concert Project, which combines music and astronomy. His adventures in the art science world started in 2013 and 14 as the director of the Art, Astronomy, Technology, and Society Group at the Contemporary Arts Museum of Chile. He is currently the director of the recently created Millennium Nucleus on young exoplanets and their moons. And in 2020, he will also be working on a project that seeks to promote dialogue between scientific and indigenous knowledge in astrophysics using virtual reality. So we're thrilled to have you here, Sebastián.
Thank you very much. This is a very nice introduction. Should I go ahead? with the presentation?
Yes, go ahead, take it away.
All right.
Thank you.
Can you see my presentation right now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. So here we go. It's 11 p.m. in Santiago. I'm a little bit tired, but very excited to be here. And thank you very much for the opportunity to talk with Carole, to talk to you guys, and to share some of the work that we've been doing here. So basically, I wanted to start with a little bit of what I do, the motivation that I have to do the astrophysics part of what I do. So basically, this is the slide with some of the science. So basically, until 3 decades ago, what I wanted to share with you is that scientists were very skeptical that we were ever going to be able to find planets outside the solar system. These are what we call exoplanets. Today, thanks to advances in technology and especially in techniques, they have allowed the discovery of thousands of exoplanets and arrive at astonishing statistics that most stars in our galaxy host planets. So that brings up the question of the origins. How do these planets form? And that's one of the main questions that I try to address in my work. How does planet formation happen? So since recently, we've been able to see where the planets form, or where we think the planets are forming. The birthplaces of these exoplanets are this space surrounding young stars. So since recently, we can actually take images of these places in the galaxy. And this image here is one of the first of its kind. It was from 2014, and it was a breakthrough for astrophysics, because here we're seeing in the middle there is a star embedded in a cocoon, a recently born star, and it's surrounded by this disk of material where planets are forming. And we think that the structure that we see in this disk is telling us something about the planet formation process. Something I haven't mentioned is that we don't know how the planets form. I mean, we live on a planet, we live in the solar system, we have lots of planets, and we don't know the details of how they came to be. Let me jump over it. This is the type of instrumentation we work with. This is at the top is the ALMA observatory at the Atacama Desert in Chile. And the one at the bottom is the very large telescope, also in the Atacama Desert in the north of Chile. And thanks to this instrumentation, we've been able to see not just one, but several protoplanetary disks. These are the places where planets are becoming planets. Basically, the material, the primordial material from the galaxy are turning into planets. We know more or less how, you start from small dust and gas and you end up as a planet. We don't know the steps in between. We don't know the details of the process. Okay. So I wanted to share with you the definition of a protoplanetary disk. So these images are of protoplanetary disks. A protoplanetary disk is defined as a rotating circumstellar disk of gas and dust surrounding a young, newly formed star, a Titori star, or a Herbig AEBE star. So with this, I want to turn my talk more into the connection between art and science. So to an astrophysicist, each word in this definition carries meaning and implies specific physical properties. There's a history behind each word, and most importantly, there are assumptions. So to anyone outside the field of astrophysics, basically, the terms involved in the definition can be very obscure. So the assumptions which scientists had to adopt to build this otherwise precise description of a protoplanetary disk are very difficult to unveil. Behind each assumption lies an intuition. and an intuition which drove the scientists in the first place to explore the phenomenon, and later to characterize it using physics and math, which are more languages that we're using. The languages, the jargon, the definitions, and the assumptions are key and sometimes unique to a specific discipline. So communication between disciplines requires the translation of all these languages, but most importantly, the sharing of underlying intuitions. This is, to me, the initial step to multidisciplinarity, the attempt to dialogue. And after this slide, I think I'm going to try to share with you two projects, mainly two projects, where we try to develop a way to share the underlying intuition of the phenomena that we were studying from the astrophysics point of view. So the first project was also with Anya Yermakova. That this was one of the first projects that I did that were in the realm of, or in between the art and the sciences. And it's called Recreo Espacial in Spanish. So like the space break, but it's a project that it's about embodied learning applied to astrophysics. So we had the idea of making this project about the translation between the somatic experiences and the scientific phenomena. We were trying to go we were aiming to produce a set of classroom activities aimed at acquiring intuitions about science concepts related to astronomy and the process of scientific discovery. So basically, that definition of a protoplanetary disk that is so complicated and it has so much embedded history and so much meaning in each word, we thought maybe we can share it via an embodied learning activity. So basically everybody has a body, we can use our bodies to learn and acquire intuitions about all these concepts. That was the idea. So we created all these classroom activities that we use to mainly find a way to share intuitions about the fundamental laws of nature. We thought, okay, so let's share what the scientists usually use to do the interpretation of the data, of the observation of nature, which are the fundamental laws: conservation of energy, conservation of angular momentum, gravity, mainly those four. So we created these activities that you can find in that website. They're mainly in Spanish, but they were basically a way for people, children, young people, adults, anyone, to acquire a somatic intuition for all these complicated concepts. You know, we did a lot of what do you call it? We explored a lot of possibilities. We talked to a lot of people. We engaged with a lot of bodies during this process, and we found a way to, you know, like do kind of a representative exercise of what the conservation of angular momentum feels to the body, what the conservation of energy feels in the body, what
Conservation
the gravity
of energy.
Sorry, what was that? What conservation of energy, angular momentum, and what gravity feels for the body, so you can acquire an intuition. In the end, for me, one of the most interesting parts of this project was what happens if we try to take these building blocks that we designed and use them to explore something that science doesn't know, like the process of planet formation. So it's something that we still don't know how it happens. So let's give all these activities, experiences to a group of dancers, give them some boundary conditions, give them some initial conditions. And in this case, we wanted to explore how planets form. A boundary condition for that exploration is that planets are believed to form in this disk. And that observation and that assumption comes from the fact that we see all the planets in the solar system belonging to a plane, right? Jupiter, Venus, Mars, they are all lying on the plane of the solar system. So we gave a number of initial conditions and boundary conditions to several artists, movement artists. And what happened was this beautiful planet formation improvisation that we ended up having. So with the intuitions of the fundamental laws of nature embedded in each body, the idea was to try to explore how you could get a planet to form. Everybody was like a little piece of interstellar material, basically. We don't know the details of how the planets form, but we know this boundary conditions that I was mentioning. And basically here, the plane of the solar system was equivalent to the diagonal of the room. They could only move along that diagonal and interact along that diagonal. And there were several processes that were at play, several processes that were competing, like fragmentation and collisions. You're trying to form a planet, the planets are growing, but encounters another planet and collides and it breaks. But somehow still some structures started to emerge in this experience. So more than 30 years ago, as I was mentioning at the beginning, humanity didn't have reasons to think that planet formation was an easy process. But now we know that most stars in our galaxy have planets. So nature is telling us that most stars, that the process is actually very efficient. Not just efficient, but common and ubiquitous in the galaxy. And it was very beautiful that in this activity, at some point, these bodies that have the embedded intuition of the fundamental laws of nature started somehow becoming a planet. There were several places where it failed, like the structure. Well, not, I wouldn't call it a fail, but the structures were not what do you call it, stable enough. But then we ended up building sort of a planet with this activity. And the boundary conditions were the key. So with this work in mind, we continue working on this game of finding the way of sharing the intuitions between scientists and artists. And that's when we arrived at Gerasi in 2018. We were already working on this charango concerto that Terra mentioned at the beginning. And a lot of the ideas that we had kind of came into maturity during this experience, during this residency at Gerasi. So the work, the charango concerto, which is called From the Big Bang Through the Fundamental Laws, is a fancy name. You can see the concerto. It's recorded in that website over there. The concerto is mainly written by Anya Yermakova. She's the main composer. I was there as the astrophysicist and the soloist with the charango. So the work was composed with three main points of focus. First, we had these fundamental laws of nature, which were the conceptual basis of the piece. And then the score is actually a mix of traditional and graphic notation, and with the graphic notation mainly comprised of astronomical data, real astronomical data. So second, the commission came from an extraordinary youth orchestra that you see in the picture, that comes from a disadvantageous neighborhood in Santiago. And third and finally, the work was inviting the charango into the world of contemporary classical music, which is a place that the charango doesn't inhabit very, very commonly. The charango is a South American instrument, South American small guitar from the Andes. The driving ambition of the composition was to invite the musicians to be playful with the astronomical data, much in the way the scientists play as well when they try to understand some phenomena. So that is to devise boundary conditions that for an improvisatory interpretation of the score that resembles the boundary condition, guiding the physicist through recurring uncertainties in the scientific research that we do. So maybe I can just show you some parts of the concerto. The concerto is not very long, but we're not going to play it because there's not enough time. I'm just going to share some fragments. Like the beginning, we start with the primordial soup of before the big, or that set the initial conditions for the universe. And that we did by establishing somatic attention between the musicians and the director of the orchestra. The recording was made in near Santiago, thanks to some funding that we got from the government. Basically the piece tries to begin by establishing this common attention. There's a lot of breathing in the score. There's a lot of room for improvisation and interpretation in the score at the beginning. Sorry. Then we have something, probably the first piece of data, of astronomical data that we encounter in the score is the cosmic microwave background. So after the primordial soup, then the universe starts evolving, starts expanding, and at some point light and matter separate, and we have this, which is an observation of the cosmic microwave background. So it's the relic radiation from the Big Bang. The brilliant thing about the cosmic microwave background is that it has a lot of structure. It's telling us that there was all of the structure that we see in the image is actually what set the initial conditions for the formation of the first galaxies, the first stars, and the first astronomical objects that we see in the universe today. So in the score, each musician had to interpret personally what this data meant for them. As you see, there are bars for the violoncello, for the flute, for the charango, for the bass, and the percussions. This is an example of that. So everybody was basically following some boundary conditions, interpreting the cosmic microwave, paying attention to the structure in the map. Very beautiful because the structure that we see in the cosmic microwave background actually is temperature fluctuations at the beginning of time. So it's something that you can actually feel when you're playing the temperature.
We can't hear you, Sebastian.
Sebastian, we cannot hear you, Sebastian.
The music's too loud. The music's too loud.
Well, the music is more important probably than the music is probably more important than what I was saying. Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Okay, then we wanted to get to, I'm going to jump into the section that it's about planet formation. So the musicians, they were also acquiring an intuition about the planet formation process, same way as the dancers were trying to mimic the processes involved in the planet formation process. So the boundary conditions for them were as well thinking of rotation, of conservation of angular momentum, feeling the collisions in the primordial disk, feeling the fragmentation of the growing planets. And in that section, basically, it was for me probably the one where you had to engage the most with your intuition through the improvisational process. As you can see, even the hydrodynamic simulations of the transformation process are embedded in the score. This is like the dancers that I was showing earlier, trying to find a way of winning over fragmentation of the small planets, trying to beat the periodicity of the problem. Anyway, that's what I wanted to share with you guys of the Charango Concerto. I think I'm running out of time. You can see the whole recording of the Charango Concerto from the Big Bang through the fundamental laws at that website. And you can also find it in Spotify. You can also find it in Vimeo and YouTube. To close, because I have like a minute, right, Alex, more or less?
Yeah, you timed it perfectly. Yeah.
All right, perfectly.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say the exploration is still ongoing. There is no single correct space in between art and science. As I wrote here, this space for art and science is infinite. And the invitation that we were trying to do with these projects was that you can use somatic awareness, use your bodies as a guiding boundary condition to share your intuitions, both as an artist and as a scientist. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sebastian. If people want to unmute themselves and just like do a little clap, that was incredible.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic.
Amazing. Actually, we have some people from Jurassic, which is the residency that you did. Tara, would you like to say a little bit about the Jurassic residence?
Can we?
Yeah.
Can we? Can we?
Sorry, we can't hear you. Wei. Give me a. We can maybe stop the share and then open it up for the gallery view.
You got it.
Awesome. There we go.
Yeah.
Sure. So, you know, the background of the Jurassic program was we've been around since 1979, and there's always been an interplay of art and science here because of our founder, Carl Jurassic. And about 10 years ago, we started a more formal program that was called Scientific Delirium Madness. It's now called Leonardo at Jurassic, where we bring all kinds of scientists and artists together. And Sebastián is an example of that. But so Wei Dong Yang, Diane, they were both also at this residency session. And I think, is Dale here? I saw Dale Jurassic had come in to join us. I don't know if he's still here. Does anyone see if his name? Anyway, Dale Jurassic had come in, and I was just going to tell him he could say something because he was a founding trustee of the program. What was that?
I think he just arrived.
No, I don't see him now. Anyway, so, you know, because of COVID, we haven't had any cohorts, but we, oh, there's Dale, I see him. But we will have a group, two groups coming, split into two groups coming up this summer. And some of the artists, you know, definitely who have been part of this over the last couple years are alumni of the art science program at Jurassic. So, yeah, and then we have artists and scientists as well coming in 2024 and maybe even 2025. But you can check out our website, and we have information on applying and on past artists who have been in residency during that session. It's a really dynamic and completely mind-exploding session that we do once a year.
Crazy amazing.
Definitely. It's an incredible session at Jurassic. You interacting with scientists, with artists. It's just amazing. And the place is just heaven. If you're interested, please go to the website and check it out.
Do you want to? do you want to continue with a little bit about kinetic arts and how?
I think we can move on.
Next,
And then if we
we'll do it
have
at the end.
time,
Yeah.
if we have time, then we go into it.
Okay, we'll talk about it in the end. I think this is a unique forum where that you don't see much of, actually, where artists get to talk across art and science, and it really opens the conversation for new ideas and new perspectives. So, so thank you, Sebastián, again. That was a wonderful presentation. A lot of ideas came about. I've noted the questions in the chat, and we're going to hold them to the very end. And then we'll have a much more juicy Q&A to engage in. So I'm going to pass it on to Kevin at Counterpulse to give an intro to our next presenter, Carole.
Hi everyone, I'm so pleased to present Carole Kim on behalf of Counterpulse, which is a space for art and community in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco. Carole Kim is an interdisciplinary artist with a focus on video projection for multimedia installation, performance, and photography. She has a hands-on, tactile approach to the materials she works with, pushing the moving image to take on optical, spatial, and dimensional form. Her work has been presented in a wide range of contexts, including experimental music, theater, art, dance, and site-specific installation. At the onset of the pandemic, Carole Kim compressed her installations to fit beneath her kitchen table, which became an intimate venue for online collaborative performance. The audiovisual ensemble she founded, Dilate Ensemble, was granted an Improvising the Network residency by ThoughtWorks Arts and Counterpulse Theater, and we presented some culminating performances not too long ago, January 13 and 14. So my pleasure to introduce to you all Carole Kim.
Hi, everybody. I'm Carole. So presented recently, like last week. And so I just drove down from the Bay Area this past weekend. And as the road unfurled under my tires, it was the first time I was able to look up from a work tunnel and start contemplating what just happened. So the timing on this talk is very interesting for me because it might help us reflect on what this piece meant and where it might be headed. So as a means of transition from Sebastián, I want to say I think it was really interesting that Sebastián starts off with the exoplanets, but then brings it down to the somatic experience in the body. And then how the science also enters the notation, the scores that the musicians then had to interpret in their bodies as to how they were going to improvise. So I'm going to start my talk on a very intimate, close to the body place, and also address ideas of how that can influence how I engage with technology and what I wish to get out of technology and how that shapes my interest in improvisation, for instance. So there's interesting commonalities here. So let's start by sharing the screen. Here we go. Okay. All right, so here we go. So I wanted to start off with a couple points of entry for you to understand more what kind of artist I am and where it comes from. So I start with this image because even though I work in multimedia performance and installation, I started off with the plastic arts. I am drawing, printmaking, and painting. And when I say I have a very hands-on approach to the media that I work with, I need to get my hands onto things. And it's all about this dialogue between material and my engagement with material that I figure out where I'm going. So drawing is an activity that I have done from the get-go. It's an activity that I feel is, I call it a seismograph of sorts, because all the impulses that travel through my body leave their traces on the paper or whatever surface I'm using. And it's very revealing. So drawing to me is not only a form of meditation, but it always tells me something of what's going on in my inner psyche, in my state of mind. And much of these drawings end up being material that I project in my installations. And the installations themselves, I often think of as spatial temporal drawings. Step 2. This brings it back to the somatic, Sebastian. So dancers in the room will be very familiar with this, but back in the 90s, I took a class with Nancy Stark-Smith, the founding force behind contact improvisation. It was a class that was both terrifying and exhilarating for me as not a professional mover, but someone who loves to move. And the story that I want to share with you is that there was this beautiful, simple dance called the finger dance. And if you'll allow me to describe it to you, with a partner facing you, and you can be standing or seated, you get centered and you make contact with your index fingers and close your eyes. And invariably, that point of contact starts to move. And the beauty of this simple dance is that it has a built-in feedback mechanism to tell you how you're doing. Because if you are either too assertive or too passive, you lose contact. Or if you feel like you're working way too hard to maintain that contact, that also is a reflection of what kind of connection you have, okay? So this simple dance resonated with me deeply, because I felt like it could be applied to how you engage with anything. It's related to my intimate relationship with drawing and that relationship of material exchange. But it's also how we engage with any medium, or how we engage across disciplines, a sound image, how we work with our collaborators, how we engage with an idea. And this has helped me to define a way to fully embrace what a creative process is all about. Is am I still here with where it's going? So I love process. I love experimentation. So none of my artistic struggle resides in that area. Okay, next slide. Oh, one other thing. And then in terms of when you move to the digital and you embrace technology, how do you make it so that it is a sensitive partner? And now moving the Dilate Ensemble to the network, how do you make the network, which is a cantankerous collaborator, also responsive? And so I've spent the last 20 years pushing video to be a live, sensitive, malleable, performative medium every way that I can. Yeah, okay, I'll stop there. So now I move to the next point I wanted to make. So I'm not very interested in the moving image in a filmic way. I mean, I do put together short videos sometimes, but the film screen and its pristine silver reflective white, it's got to be all these perfect things, or the trope in performance where you have a large projection and the live performer in front that stubbornly just, anyway, there's so much more you can do. So with predecessors such as Anthony McCall in his piece, Line Describing a Cone, it's just a simple projector with an animation that is drawing a circle. And originally it was shown in a smoky room. Everyone was smoking, but now it's shown in a, with a fog machine. But so this cone is formed, and it's a cone that can be interrupted with the body and cast these big shadows. Or the piece, The Veiling by Bill Viola. When I saw this piece at LACMA, I instinctively moved right between the layers, smack in the middle, and looked in every direction. Apparently you weren't supposed to do that, but I think the guard wasn't watching carefully. But I had this moment where when you stared at the projection, there was this image of a woman, or on the other side, a man, making their way through the woods towards you. And there was this feeling of the space just opening up in this most glorious way, with and a sense of space that I had never quite experienced before. And what I loved about it is that you were still in the room. You didn't have to wear glasses or anything. So you were in physical, actual space. And yet here was this moment when space just went, wow, and opened up. And it was a space that I was like, I want to work in that space. I want to explore and see what can happen there. So in other words, I am interested in projection in space, okay? And using different materials that might intercept the cone of light that a projector emits. So I tried all kinds of materials. I was a friend of the fabric district in LA, exploring all kinds of, shiny things and translucent material and material with glitter on it and all this kind of stuff. And like, I would go through a love affair with a certain kind of fabric at any given point. Like at one point it was silver tulle. Silver tulle was the sexiest thing, ever. But then I landed on using this black scrim, which is basically the scrim that's used for window screens. But you may not know, it comes in all kinds of grades like better view and ultra view and no-seam weave and that kind of thing. But it's black, and it serves for me as a nearly transparent structural matrix for drawing, painting, collage, sewing. So I'm just going to whip through these images fairly quickly without going into enormous explanation. But so I started making all these layered scrims that would echo the architecture of a space and forming these composite architectures. So this is both this translucent layering with motifs that were derived from the building, and then actual video projection of like the roof tiles. So it becomes this composite, lightweight, transmuted material kind of architecture. And it's on a scale that could welcome the live body into it. This was an underwater scene. This is me cutting up the scrim and painting on it. Working on a piece for that I did with Pamela Z at Fort Mason in San Francisco, where I essentially took over the entire venue. So the layers of scrim went right over the heads of the audience. So you were actually in this structure, and it essentially behaved like a dark cave. That was really fun to work with. This piece, I just hung hundreds of strips of the scrim to try to make sort of a cloud-like surface. Roxanne, I saw you in the room. Roxanne Steinberg was in this piece. And then this piece was similarly layered as the piece that we did up at Counterpulse, and had this trunk structure of an old oak tree. And once again, this is Roxanne Steinberg. And then my last stop before I get to Dilate Ensemble is I went to Norway on an artist residency, and I started projecting in the forest. And for me, this was having nature do all the intricate work. I didn't have to do the sewing. It's a line of work that I will also try to continue as we figure out how to work these days. I went to Norway in the middle of the summer, so it was only dark from midnight to 3 a.m. My advanced button is acting a little weird, but let's see. Okay, so I'll just go through these images. Okay, boom. Pandemic hits and people are trying to figure out what to do. So this is the beginning of Dilate Ensemble. And I will mention that there are 2 Dilate Ensemble members in the grid with us tonight, John Raskin and Scott Miller, who I would welcome to add any commentary or certainly help answer questions afterwards. So what I do is I encircle my kitchen table with black cloth and it becomes a miniature black box venue. And I create these miniaturized video installation, sculptural installations. And one of the beauties of working small is that you can let your imagination run in ways that is not possible. Like to build something like this life scale would be prohibitive. But working small scale, you can do anything, right? And you can use different materials that you wouldn't have access to anyway. So I'm just following with one still image from each piece, but this was the first piece and it was called Dilate, and thus that's where we got our name from. A piece called Parasol. Playing with these old windows and painting with this translucent milky white paint and projecting onto it. Again, creating a different kind of architecture. And then something's going on with my advanced button, and I apologize, but it wants to choke up like that. Okay, so after approximately 2 years of performing together, we start the project with Counterpulse and ThoughtWorks Arts. And it's the first time that we're going to be able to engage directly with a physical space again. So pulling Dilate Ensemble into the kind of work that I was doing prior to the pandemic. And hopefully get to meet each other. So Dilate Ensemble is a group that met online. We're only beginning to meet each other in person, but for instance, I've yet to meet Scott and I've yet to meet Gloria. But we feel like war veterans because we have dealt with the internet in so many shapes or forms that sometimes you're just teching for 3 hours and you get 20 minutes to rehearse. But so we feel very close, having lived through all that. So Counterpulse began in September, and it began with an investigation of every niche in the building. Like, what do you got? Let's try it. And one of the first spaces that really pulled me in was the upstairs studio with this bay of windows. So I'm like, okay, that's in. And so John Raskin joined me and we just started experimenting and seeing what we could do to have the building be like a collaborator. So again, it's this thing of like, how do we work fluidly with each other? And I was delighted to find things like, oh, look what happens when you project in the rafters, it just goes crazy. And then if you're going to project in the rafters, then of course you have to project on the floor. So we made this big U-shaped kind of projection that you'll, Alex, I don't know if you included the links, but for those of you who couldn't join us last week, we're including the YouTube links from the Counterpulse channel so that you can view it at your leisure. And then I went home and I started constructing a scrim installation for the basement. So there again, I quoted the upstairs windows, but this time in a sewn version, right? And I juxtaposed it with the topographical drawings. Now, the reference to topography for me functions on many levels. In some ways, just a way in saying, where are we right now? And topography is a form of notation to indicate dimensionality on a flat surface. And I feel like we're living through a very flat period in terms of communication right now. So it's kind of like this coaxing of how can we bring more dimensionality to it? And then the other reference I think of is some of the drawings to me felt very related to the body. So this feels very pelvic to me. At the time, I was assisting a dear friend through hospice care, and cancer ended up claiming her life when I was in the middle of this project. So all of that witnessing of a body failing, and of course, all the love I had for this friend is also in this piece. Oh, and then one more topography references. As we're trying to bridge the physical space to the virtual and have that work together again in this way. What is the topography of that? How do you describe that? How can we come up with different analogies that might help us expand our ideas of bridging and working together in a very immediate way? Okay, so me in the basement. What's beautiful is the basement is the opposite of the upstairs studio. The upstairs studio is wooden floors, it's warm, it's got those beautiful windows, daylight, all this kind of stuff. The basement is concrete, it's cold, and it feels very compressed because the ceiling is only like 8.5 feet or something tall. So this is where the installation was installed. And this is me talking to Shinichi Koga, who is a dancer who joined us very last minute because as with many of you, I'm sure, so many of our intentions and plans got derailed by COVID, and we kept having to pivot. It's like, and just like reconfigure and completely change what we were doing. But in the end, this is our working shot, connecting with the other Dilate members who are tuning in remotely. In the end, I feel like the piece became so much about where we are now. So there's this remote presence in Luisa, who is dancing, singing, moving in New York in her apartment. And then there's Shinichi, who's in the space physically. And the piece for me, as I reflect upon it now, it was so much about their connection and all the contradictions. And so you have Luisa, who's remote, and yet you see her face, you see her flesh, you see her body kind of in its full volumetric form. And Shinichi, who is physically there, when you're in the installation, he's this mysterious shadow caster that comes in and out of the layers. And sometimes you can't even tell where his actual body resides when he's in there. And so it's like almost this contradiction that the body that is remote is actually more physically perceived. Yeah, okay. So I think the best thing to do now is I have put together a 5-minute excerpt. It feels like I'm taking just this little taste of something. So I strongly encourage any of you who haven't been able to see the whole thing, that you do so, but this will give you just a little taste of it.
Aik turin, mistam, tikitio, barnutarlo, eukoriaseni, vosta, ikudrias. Eukoriaseni, quasida, vosta, ikudrias. Quasida,
Okay, you can stop share. So just to conclude, I also wanted to say that we had one day to record. It is a recording, however, it is a recording of a live performance that's improvisational. improvisational in nature. So Dilate is very interested in working with the internet as a medium. We're not particular about the fact that there is latency, for instance. We're also curious about where it can take us. It does not feel like a consolation prize that we're dealing with the internet as a medium right now. We see the potential for artistic investigation. We feel really connected. It's the only way that you could pull off this improvisation. There's no way that you could otherwise. So I think to conclude, I think I will say that people who have the faculties to connect with people in this way, the technology is waiting for you. If we settle for less, we're going to get less. So even if you're not the person who wants to endeavor technologically in it, find the people who do and come join us. We've been having an infinite amount of fun doing it. And I've also been collaborating with other artists on drawing collaborations on Zoom and working with dancers with drawings on Zoom. And so much is possible and delightful to engage in, not just because we're in a pandemic. I feel like it's a creative avenue that's worthy of being explored. That's it.
Thank you so much, Carole. That was incredible. Woo. Before we open it for the Q&A, I actually just want to extend a word to Counterpulse and maybe have Julie give a little bit of background of this project that you just shared with us over that wonderful video. Is Julie here?
Yeah.
Hey, how y'all doing?
Hi.
I'm new here.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you, Carole and Dilate. It was a really, actually, I wouldn't say wild, more like subtle, deep adventure to have you take over our space and graft one studio onto another studio. And I'm one of the very few people who had a live experience of the actual physical installation. It was really incredible, and we look forward to perhaps a different and next step in the project and realizing it at Counterpulse for live audiences. And it was also really, really incredible in its virtual format of this recording of a live performance. So thank you to Dilate. I just wanted to say a few things just to provide a kind of wraparound sense of how this work is sitting at Counterpulse. So Counterpulse partnered with ThoughtWorks Arts to launch this Improvising the Network residency, which Dilate and another sort of ensemble group received called Hot Club. So I think that some of the language is interesting around the open call, so I'll just drop in the link to it. Of course, it's no longer open, but I do think it's interesting to look at. One of the ways we were talking about this was reclaiming the means of communications and reclaiming the means of content production through having a kind of sovereign server that's, inside of the permanent facility that Counterpulse is in the process of buying in downtown San Francisco. So that really excites me, and I think it's opening and sort of blossoming into these potentials as we see the way different artists respond to that prompt and make something of the both sort of physical environment and material of Counterpulse, as well as this connectivity that we're creating there. It's a work in progress, surely, but the Dilate work was a real sort of shining moment on what could be possible. I'll just quickly say that the other artists in residence in the Improvising the Network residence have their show coming up in March. I'm dropping in the link to that so that you can just sort of check back in. It's a little bit up in the air because of the pandemic as it goes, but we will be releasing tickets soon and be inviting people for experiences in March, and then also some things later kind of emerging in May. So check that out as well. Counterpulse has been working and seeding at this intersection of dance and technology for about 5 years now. And one of my original interests in it is, thinking of the body as kind of the most sophisticated piece of technology that most of us know how to operate still. So I took a lot of inspiration from your talk as well, Sebastian, related to that sort of, rooting into the somatic experience of the body to find these intuitions on the unknowable truth of the universe would be one of the ways I summarize what you talked about. So I think it's really cool to bring live performance and technology together. I agree with Carol, go out and behold and partake.
Hey, why y'all niggas stop my video
And we'll be
like that?
releasing
Like, how
other
y'all
residency calls for collaborations at that intersection. So I hope you'll stay tuned with Counterpulse. We just minted a strategic plan, so I have to take the opportunity to just pass along that information to you, a theory of change and strategic plan that talks about sort of our work in community building and art creation. And so if you are the type of person who wants to dweeb out on some institutional language around impact, I invite you to take a look at the visions page that I just linked. But I'll just keep it to that and turn us into the Q&A because I know that there's a lot of interesting questions emerging after those really incredible talks. So thank you again to both of the artists.
Thank you, Julie. I appreciate that. So I want to make sure that everyone's in gallery view at this moment in time. If you're not, go to the top right of your screen and you can switch to the gallery view so we can all see each other. At this point in time, I'm going to start with going in order of the questions that were submitted in the chat.
Shut the fuck up.
Sorry, hold on. We need to remove somebody. All right. Sometimes we get Zoom intruders. We're high alert on those. All right. So, what is going on here? Wei, are you tracking it?
Yeah, I'll keep track of it.
All right, thank you so much. All right, so one of the first questions that was posed in here was by Stephanie, who also left. But Stephanie asked to Sebastian, is the color natural or was it a decision made by humans? I think it was one of your first images on the galaxies, or it's one of those images that you first shared in your presentation.
Protoplanetary disks.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. So the protoplanetary disks, we're actually seeing the small dust called material. It's like sand that is orbiting these young stars. And they actually emit radiation at a wavelength that we don't see. So color doesn't really have the same meaning. Color in astronomical images always it's a tricky question because, what's color? So yes, the color in those images is decided by some human. It's just a color scale that we put arbitrarily, that it's looks good basically, and it's helpful for the interpretation of the images. But yeah, those images are obtained with at a frequency that we don't really see, low frequency in the radio part of the spectrum. So yeah, color is not real. But what is color?
That's a good question. We also have a follow-up question by Zach. Do you want to ask it? You said something about intuition.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much. Thanks to both presenters. I really enjoyed that. Sebastian, you used the word intuition quite a bit, and I'm curious if you could tell us what the word means to you, intuition, and is it different from an idea? Like you mentioned about how we have certain underlying intuition, or we come up with an intuition, and is coming up with an intuition different from coming up with an idea?
That's a very good and difficult question, Zach. Thank you very much. So I think, well, I'm not sure. Intuition for me has more complexity than an idea, but at the same time, it has a subconscious part, like it's more truthful than an idea. For me, an intuition is more connected to or involved at the root of idea generation, rather than, it's not an intuition for me is not the same as an idea. It's more the intuition is involved in idea generation and idea evolution. So from like the example that I sometimes give in the scientific practice, like we're trying to solve planet formation, we have all these equations. These equations are fine in some cases, but they don't work in others. We need to modify them. How do you modify them? So we start adding or removing terms. We start stretching the equation, destroying the equation, basically playing with it. And you use your intuition when you don't have data. That's how scientists use intuition sometimes. Yeah, it's more connected to the idea generation for me, rather than being the same as an idea.
Thank you. Thank you.
The next question for Suzette.
Oh, sorry. I have to leave like in 15 minutes, or I'm like no, sorry. I have to leave at 7:15 for a meeting. I just wanted to thank you both, Sebastian and Carole, for amazing presentations. And thank you so much for hosting this. I just wanted to ask, Carole, I've known Carole for a very, very long time. And so I know that you're really interested in science and physics, and I was trying to put you in conversation with Sebastian in terms of his work. And so my question was basically, if you can elaborate a little bit more about sort of your, relationship with either, physics or with, nature, and your piece at the Descanso Gardens, and how it underpins your understanding of the multi-dimensions of space and time, and the way you manipulate film and technology. Because we're talking about, you want technology to do stuff, right? And so I was wondering if you can elaborate on that.
I think my point of entry to that question is that it is about the physics of light and how it responds to the materials that I build an installation in. And it's not something that you can predict and just say, oh, that's going to work. Every installation calls for something else, and it takes time to know what's going to, I call it what makes it shine. Like what is the thing that elevates and becomes this magical sort of perceptual thing, And so it's never a plug and play situation, because you cannot deny the physics of it. It's not just put it on a big screen and the piece is there, So the circumstances surrounding Counterpulse were perfect, because it allowed me to really work with the material I have and find what worked. And that is true when I go out into landscape as well. Every site that I chose, it's not about mapping. It's not like those people who take this building and make the building look like it's going to explode and, that kind of thing. It's not a skin. It's really like this interaction, like it's the landscape is too intricate to say, oh, I'm going to map that tree. It's like, no, it's like, how are you going to work with the landscape? How are you going to make it do something that's, it's this constant tweakage. Like I feel that way about technology in general. It's all about the subtlety and the constant, like just dialing it in just right for the magic to happen, and to have it be something that is unpredictable, maybe starts to seem behavioral, rather than algorithmic or predictably mathematical. And it's as if you're bringing a creature to life. That's what it feels like to me. And each creature is unique. Did that answer the question, Suzette?
Thank you.
Unfortunately, Mabel left us, but She did have a question for Sebastián, saying, is somatic intuition in your work connected to intuitive indigenous wisdom?
That's a very good question. I'm not very sure. I think I can find parallels and links with the indigenous wisdom I know. So the indigenous wisdom, the intuitive indigenous wisdom of the indigenous that inhabit the land here. So indigenous wisdom that I know. And I think they can be linked in the sense that both are very truthful. But it's hard for me to answer the question because for me, indigenous wisdom is there's so much diversity, so heterogeneous as well. Yeah, so I don't know.
Yeah, no, that was great. It's a hard one, for sure.
Can I follow up too?
Yeah.
Sebastián, I'm really curious about how other cohorts in the science world for you are open to talking about intuition and who are open to doing experiments like this embodiment thing to try to understand something that's still unknown in the science world. Like, is that something in your circle that seems commonplace or seems widely accepted, or do you come across as the strange guy that's, you know, out in left field kind of thing? I'm curious.
So yeah, it's not very common among physicists and astrophysicists here around in the city. But on the other hand, my country is going through a transformation at the moment of a revalidation of the indigenous wisdom. We're going through, I don't know if you're aware, but we went through a revolution a couple of years ago, and we are writing a new constitution as a result of that revolution. And that constitution was beautifully started being led by an indigenous woman. And there is this priority on revalidating the indigenous wisdom, the intuitive indigenous wisdom of our land, which has been buried under hundreds of years of colonization. So it is something that is growing right now. I feel it, at least, even in more scientific circles, which are a little bit more reluctant to talk about intuition. I totally agree with you.
Can I call on Dai to ask your question? Dai, you asked a little bit about the structures.
Yeah, I was just really curious about how you and your collaborator worked with the dancers. Like right now, Wei and I are teaching a course together with Suzette, who is here today and is friends with Carole, about entropy. And we are researching and trying to figure out how to come up with these ideas for the students to participate in some scores. So since the theme is like science and dance, and for you, astrophysics and dance as well, I'm just really curious how you worked with the dancers.
So it was
like you talked about structures, like how the structures emerged. How did you do that?
Well, there was a buildup. Like, we tried to develop a way of acquiring intuition about fundamental laws of nature. That I know I repeat that a lot, but I don't know any other way to say it. And then for the planet formation experience that we did with the dancers, we try to be we try not to be completely representational of the process, because we don't know the details of the process, but we know some boundary conditions. We know some of the things that are going on. So, for instance, the idea of coagulation. So you have two planetesimals, we call them, small pieces of planet, that they are evolving together around the star, and sometimes they find each other and they coagulate in a way, so they grow. So for us, that was, if you are a dancer and moving along this diagonal, which is like the protoplanetary disk, if you touch someone, try to grab their hand. And then once after that, the instruction was, or the boundary condition was, then you have to start rotating. And while you are rotating, if you hit someone else and you cannot grab their hands, you have to separate. So that's the competing process, fragmentation. When you're growing a planet, astronomers always say that we can grow planets of up to 1 meter very easily, and then they all break. Basically, when you are building planets, you have a lot of rocks that are 1 meter in diameter. Then when they collide, they don't really stick to each other, they break apart. So the instruction to the dancers was, if you are holding hands, and you are rotating because there is conservation of angular momentum, if you hit someone else and cannot grab their hand, you have to fragment, you have to separate. But then they figure out a way of growing by some of the dancers started going, like adding a dimension. They went onto the floor, and they invented or they broke some of the limitations. So it was that's how the structures were generated.
Thank you so much. This is great. And I'm sure the dancers were breaking all the rules and making things interesting and fun to watch. Thank you so much.
They really were not breaking the rules. They were actually finding ways around them, they were still valid in a way. Yeah.
So you mean like they were still following the rules, but maybe they were doing it upside down?
Exactly. And that broke the symmetry of the problem and generated a structure. And that's how, the universe seems to work.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Have to try that one. Carole, I know you have some of your Dilate ensemble casts here. I wonder if any questions that you want to ask or address.
So I welcome Scott Miller and John Raskin to the table. They are coming from the sound end of Dilate Ensemble. I don't know if the group would have any questions for them, or whether Scott and John would just like to contribute additional information that I didn't cover.
Well, one thing that connects the audio side of what we did with Katina to the general theme of this is that a lot of the audio programming is using an approach called ecosystemic programming, which each of these different spaces that the musicians were in had microphones that were used to collect data about the sound in that space that is then algorithmically processed, modeled on the behavior of different objects and agents in the natural world. Basically, it's using feedback-based systems from general systems theory to determine the algorithmic processing of the sound. And so all of the different musicians were connected, albeit latently and with questionable internet sometimes, but there were these data connections so that everybody's action would have a kind of influence on each other's action, and this would propagate throughout the entire system. And that was a key component to this generation of sound and everybody's relationship to each other sonically, including Carole, where a lot of that sound was connected directly into her own animation generation software that was responding to the sound, which we musicians were then responding to the visual imagery. And there was just a lot of, I guess, transduction happening throughout this big network.
So in other words, it wasn't just about the musicians hearing each other and playing with each other. Anything of what they played could enter into Scott's ecosystem and appear 10 minutes later. So it's almost like you had to be very conscious of what you were entering the system, because its impact could be much more than just the initial outburst.
That's really great. And thank you for sending that link in the chat, Kevin. I'm going to have to study this. It's really amazing. We're coming near the end here of Y Exchange. It went by fast, didn't it? I just want to let people unmute themselves again, give that human touch of sound, and really give these artists a big applause. This was a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Beautiful, inspiring.
Awesome. Really beautiful. Thank you so much.
Beautiful. Thank you so much,
Very well.
Sebastian.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Sebastian. And thank you, everyone. It's really good. It's really good to see you. I hate when it's just a talking head. So I'm feeling the connection right now. Thank you.
It definitely makes a difference, Carol. That's why we choose to do Zoom. And, sometimes people want to do the webinar style, and we really don't like that. We like Zoom. We like to see people. We like to see their reactions. We like to see people talking and asking questions. And so thank you so much, Sebastian. Thank you, Carol. Thanks, everybody, for being here tonight. Please come back. We do that every month, every last Wednesday of the month, usually. And we hope to see you back. We also do our open labs every Wednesday. Maybe, Sebastian, we do one of those scores this coming Wednesday. Maybe we do one of the scores. We do movement scores. We talk about technology. We experiment. People are doing some projects. They come and they talk about their projects. There are lots of sharing and exchange during the open labs. So if you're interested, please talk to us, stay in touch. Alex will send a follow-up email to everybody with all the information from the artists, links, so you get to explore more about the things they do. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Sebastian.
Thank you.
And thank you, Jurassic ODC and Counterpulse, for doing that with us.
Awesome. I'm going to put the links to Kinetic Arts. Once you log in, you can see our upcoming events. And once, I finish the recording of this event, I will post it on the Y Exchange page of the Kinetic Arts, as well as our YouTube channel. So if you ever want to come back to it, of course, you'll have that as a resource. But thank you. A huge honor. And have a good night, everyone.
Sending good wishes of health and well-being to everybody.
Yes. Cheers.
Cheers. Ciao.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.